Well, good morning. Welcome. Good to see you guys. Thanks for joining us this morning. And we are in a series, How to Live, Love, and Lead Like Jesus. And we are in part 14 this morning. And we're going to look at the reality we find ourselves in. The reality that we find ourselves in. Allergies or what? But I have been struggling with a little tickle right there. And when do you think it gets worse? Yeah? Right? When you try to say something. I was thinking about some stuff this morning, and would you say that the world feels fractured? Just a little? Divided? Chaotic? But even more so, and this has become more apparent to me over the last, thank you, over the last few years, that darkness feels organized. Feels organized. And I want to encourage you because it's easy to get sucked into current affairs and the 24-hour news cycle. But all of this didn't start in the last election cycle. All this chaos, all this organized darkness, it didn't start when the last politician you hate got into office of your choice. So where did it start? Where did it start? And over the next few weeks, as I promised from last Sunday, from Easter, I promised over the next few weeks we would be looking at a key element of the life of Jesus. And since we're in a series learning how to live, love, and lead like Jesus, I promised that we would be looking at that a big portion of Jesus' ministry was freeing people from demonic oppression, from demonic enslavement of some sort. And so, but first, today I want to start with a little spiritual history lesson. And I want to kind of take us back and connect the dots from the Jewish scriptures into the teachings of Jesus. And I'm going to do that using the theology of a man named Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Heiser. If you haven't heard of him, he's passed away regrettably. But he did an incredible work that he culminated in a book called The Unseen Realm. The Unseen Realm. So I'm taking a lot of this today from him, and we're going to look at how the unseen realm shapes the reality that we find ourselves in. And I'm going to be doing it this morning from the 30,000-foot view. So here's my set of disclaimers. Talking about demons, you got to do disclaimers, right? My set of disclaimers is a lot of what he taught or says, and a lot of what I've since come to believe, I didn't really believe 10 years ago. So I feel like this is an area where my theology, you might say, is evolving. So and this is another thing too, what I would say, this is what we call open-handed theology. In other words, you may disagree yourself, and that's okay. Like I said, 10 years ago, a lot of what I'm going to share with you today, I would have disagreed with, or did disagree with. And good-naturedly, mind you, right? Well, I was disagree good-naturedly, right? But to set this all up, it has always been, this is what I want to start with, a core belief for me in my theology is that it has always been God's desire to partner with humanity in ruling the world. I believe it has always been his desire to do that. And you see that from the very beginning. That he wants to share his authority with humans, with his created, to rule and steward the world. So to set it up, we have recorded in Genesis chapter 3. It's the beginning, the first book of the Bible, if you're not familiar with the Bible. In Genesis chapter 3, we have what is known as the fall of mankind. But then, maybe you didn't know this, but in Genesis chapter 6, we have a second fall. In Genesis chapter 6, this fall is so bad, the earth has gotten so terrible that God brings a worldwide, well, at least that's what's a worldwide flood. And there's only one dude, Noah, that God is right before God, or isn't just completely off his rocker. And so God asks Noah to build a boat, Noah's Ark. I think everybody knows about Noah's Ark. It was really strange to me, though, when I actually read the story. I had kids, and my kids had a little stuffy Noah's Ark thing where you could unvelcro and pull out the giraffe, and the monkeys and stuff. And I was like, oh, we have a little child's plaything about genocide. Oh, that's really sweet. I never really put that together, but that's kind of what. Anyway, little side note: you might never look at Noah's Ark again. 2 by 2. Oh yeah, right. And it's something that Heiser points out and puts together is that we actually have a third fall in Genesis 10 and 11. In Genesis 10 and 11. In Genesis 10, it lists 70 or 72 nations, depending on what text. Neither here nor there. And then in Genesis 11, humanity is united in rebellion, but it's united in rebellion against God. If you're not familiar with the Tower of Babel, it's where everyone on the earth at that point speaks all the same language. And so God looks down and they're rebelling. They're trying to build a tower to get to him. And so God scatters them and changes their language. The interesting thing in all of this, these 3 falls, is that in particularly it's clearly spelled out after Noah, after the ark comes to rest on the land and the animals and the humans come out of the ark, that God recommissions Noah with the same language that he uses to Adam and Eve. That he says that you are still my image bearers, and I'm still calling you to be fruitful and multiply. So you see, no matter all of this, the struggle that God has with humanity, his call on us has not changed. That he still today wants to partner with us to steward creation, to bring about his good, loving rule in the world. That has not changed. Another little side note for parents. This is a comfort to me, and maybe it will be to you as well. For those of us that you have adult kids, any of you that might have adult children that aren't doing exactly what you hoped they'd be doing, haven't maybe exactly quite turned out as if you hoped they'd turn out, and maybe you're a little hard on yourself as a parent. Just take comfort from God. Right? Even the absolute perfect parent had children that didn't turn out as he'd hoped. So give yourself a break, okay? I mean, if God was beating himself up for his children's decisions like some of us beat ourselves up for our children's decisions, God would be in therapy, all right? But he's not, and obviously I'm being facetious on some level, but it's always a comfort to me when that occurred to me. Oh, God's our heavenly Father, and we constantly thumb our nose at him. But you know what? Just like us parents, right? What do? We still love him, don't we? And he still loves us, right? Thank God. Thank God. All right, little parent side note. So, what we have here is we have recorded these 3 falls in Genesis. Then the last fall where humanity is united against God in rebellion. And so God divides them up, and there's a list of these 70 nations. And then Moses, who's the reported author of Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy, God gives the nations over to lesser spiritual rulers and keeps Israel for himself. Well, listen to this, Deuteronomy 32. When the Most High assigned lands to the nations, when he divided up the human race, he established the boundaries of the peoples according to the number in his heavenly court. For the people of Israel belonged to the Lord, Jacob his special possession. Now what you see here, and right after Genesis 11, right after Babel, then we get to the story of Abraham. And this is where kind of the story of God, basically God handing over the nations to lesser gods, to his divine council, and he focuses on Israel, starting with Abraham. If you're familiar with Father Abraham, if you grew up in church, you grew up singing Father Abraham. Had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm. Okay, all right. Yeah, that one. I know, religious trauma. We can't pay for therapy, but, whatever. So he had... So we see then that God then singles out and begins to work with Israel. What's really interesting in the call of Abraham by God is that God promises that through Abraham's seed, through his offspring, all of the world would be blessed. So God has not given up on the rest of the nations, but and it doesn't explain why, but he's just like, okay, I need a break. Okay, I'm going to focus on just one nation. I don't know. I don't. Right, I'm just surmising. I'm just humanizing God, I guess, right, you might say. But that's me. I'm like, okay. So, the problem, right, these spiritual rulers did not lead people to God. They enslaved them. They tempted them to have the humans worship them instead. And so they corrupted, they enslaved, and the world has become occupied territory as a result. So Psalm 82 then, and this is all kind of Heiser. So the beautiful thing about Heiser, if any of you grew up as a Bible nerd like I did, and you were reading these passages of the Bible that you're like, in Genesis 6, for example, for the longest time. Genesis 6, basically, right, before the flood. The sons of God had relations with the daughters of women because they were beautiful, and that created the giants in the land, the Nephilim. Right, and then they were on the days then and then afterwards. So they were around, you're like, huh? Right, what? And you have a random, you have David and Goliath. Okay, he's a giant, so okay. And then you have these other, elements to this, but you don't really know, I don't know if you're like me, like you don't really know what to do with it. Like there's this random language in Corinthians that Paul writes, and he's talking about, I think it's 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 11, where he's talking about women and their hair and all this random stuff. And then he finishes, and because of the angels. And you're like, what does how women cut their hair not have anything to do with angels? Heiser tells you. It's phenomenal. And it makes sense. I mean, he strings all of these really random scriptures together to make sense. I don't know. See, he did it. The guy was a genius. He was a genius. And I have a handout I'll send you home with all the details because, like I said, I'm going to, blow your hair back today, all right? You might leave more confused than you came, but first service said it was all right. So, so we're okay. All right. So, did I read Psalm 82? I did not. So Psalm 82 describes God's eventual judgment of these other lesser gods, rulers. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you hand down unjust decisions by favoring the wicked? I say you are gods, and you are all children of the Most High, but you will die like mere mortals and fall like every other ruler. So this perfectly describes the situation we find ourselves in. The world has become divided geographically, geopolitically, deceived spiritually, and disconnected from God relationally. And I don't often do this, but on a topic like today, because I want to just set us up and move on in the next coming weeks to more practical, out of the 30,000-foot view, I'm going to show you a phenomenal group of folks from Portland that produce videos called the Bible Project. And there's a little video that they kind of help us explain.
For most of human history, people have believed in some kind of spiritual realm that exists alongside the world as we know it.
Right, and the biblical authors are no exception.
Yeah, for them, the spiritual realm is a different kind of realm than ours. And to highlight that difference, the Bible refers to God's space as the sky or the heavens.
Because the sky is really different from the land. It's above and beyond. And up there are shiny bodies that move around. I think of these as flaming gas balls.
But when the biblical authors looked up, the stars gave them a way to talk and think about spiritual beings. In the Bible, they're called the sons of God, or the rulers and authorities, or even sometimes the divine council.
So that sounds really important. What does the divine council do?
Well, they're introduced in Genesis chapter 1, where they're called the host of heaven, that is, the sun, moon, and stars. And there, they're also called signs, meaning that their power and status symbolizes and points to God's power and status.
Yeah, so in Genesis 1, God appoints them to rule over the day and night.
Exactly. And then later in the Bible, we're told that they were celebrating God's power and creativity when he created the world.
Like the cheering section of a game.
Yeah, right. There are also stories in the Bible where God invites the divine council to participate in making a decision. Like when they help decide how to bring down the corrupt Israelite king Ahab. Or in the book of Job, where they debate God's policy of rewarding people who do good.
So they're like God's staff team. But why does God need a team? If he's powerful enough to create the whole universe, he could surely rule it without any help.
Well, he doesn't need them. But apparently, the God of the Bible wants to share authority with others.
Oh, right. God shares his rule with human partners on Earth. And so, in the same way, there's a parallel story of God sharing his authority to rule with spiritual partners.
Yes, that is, until it all falls apart in a twin rebellion. So you have humans who want to rule on Earth on their own terms. So they start building their own nation using their own definitions of good and evil.
Yeah, the famous story of the building of Babylon.
But check this out. When biblical authors like Moses or Isaiah looked back at the origins of Babylon, they saw more than just a human rebellion, but also a spiritual rebellion.
What was this spiritual rebellion?
Well, there were members of the divine council who, like the humans, didn't want to represent God's authority anymore. They wanted to be God, and they rebelled. And so these created beings deceived humans into worshiping them instead of the Creator. And so Babylon becomes the biblical image for the combined human and spiritual rebellion.
And so God scatters the people from Babylon into different nations.
And in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses says, this is when God also scattered the rebels of the divine council with them.
So the nations are handed over to spiritual rulers.
Yes, and this is why when the biblical prophets look out at the violent empires of their day, they see two dimensions to all the chaos and injustice. Human rebels who are being corrupted by the worship of spiritual rebels, the idol gods of money, sex, and military power.
Yeah, when humans give their allegiance to these powers, it leads to a world like ours.
Right, and the best example of this is the story of the Exodus, where we're told that the Egyptian genocide of the Israelites was inspired by Pharaoh and by the gods of Egypt.
That's really intense.
But it's not the end of the story. When God rescued the Israelites from Egypt and its gods, he invited them to become his covenant partners and learn a different way of ruling the world.
And they agree to it, but in the end they don't honor the partnership. They give their allegiance to other gods.
And so this leads to their exile in Babylon, where they become slaves once again to a foreign nation and their spiritual rulers, awaiting a new exodus into freedom. And this is where the story of Jesus picks up. He said he was here to rescue the world and take it back from the rebels.
Which rebels? The human ones or the spiritual ones?
Exactly. For Jesus, it was all connected. When he marched into Jerusalem for Passover, he was announcing the ultimate exodus. He was there to confront and overcome all rebel powers and authorities, and he did it by giving up his life.
So this is what the Apostle Paul meant when he said that Jesus disarmed the powers and authorities, triumphing over them by the cross.
Yes, Jesus condemned our evil by allowing the rebels to unleash all their hate and evil on him. But then he overcame it with the power of his love and resurrection life. And then Jesus told his followers that all authority in heaven and earth now belongs to him.
Yeah, the ultimate human and divine partner. This is really good news.
Yeah, and it's why the apostles started inviting everyone to give their allegiance to the risen Jesus, to discover freedom and a new way to be human.
Now, while Jesus gained a decisive victory over the rebel powers, he didn't destroy them. They're still around, causing problems.
Yes, and in fact, they are the problem. The apostles said that humanity's real enemy is never another human. Rather, it's the spiritual powers that animate our cultural idols that inspire hatred, division, and violence.
So when I see people hurting other people, Behind it is the divine council gone rogue. How do you deal with this kind of enemy?
Well, the Apostle Paul said we can resist by putting on the character traits of Jesus, like armor, faithfulness, justice, and peace. And he said that our only weapon is the Word of God. That is, the biblical story of good news that Jesus has overcome all rebels with the divine power of his life and love.
Yeah. All right. So behind broken human systems are broken spirits. And I want to submit to you that the problem isn't political, it's spiritual. That you cannot fix the world with better politicians or positive thinking alone, that you need a new king. You need a new king. And Jesus enters the war zone. He enters earth announcing the kingdom of God is here. And in the past, if you've heard me say this, I liken this to kind of help us understand it, a little bit. And the video kind of touched on this too, but it's likening it to when Jesus came and defeated death on the cross, defeated sin and shame and hell and everybody and everything, all these evil rulers. It was like D-Day, if you know your World War II history. When the Allies landed on Normandy, when they established beachheads on the continent in World War II, the war was over. Everybody knew it, but it was just a matter of time. There was still a lot of violence, right? A lot of death, a lot of work to be done. And so this is kind of what this is like when Jesus came. And now what I want to kind of then move into the New Testament here and look at Luke, the way Luke records Jesus doing what he's doing. And what I want you to pay attention here is Jesus' very strategic way that he goes about announcing to the powers what's happening. And you and I, general readers, I missed this for 50 years of my life, to be honest, 45 years of my life, until Heiser points this out. But once you see it, it's one of those things where this makes perfect sense. You kind of can't unsee it. So what Jesus is doing very strategically. So first he calls 12 apostles. If you're not familiar with the biblical story, you've perhaps heard of that. He calls these 12 guys. And he's up on a mountain and he calls them to him. And lists them and calls them to be his apostles, his closest followers. Well, there's another number 12. What could that number be? And what it is he's announcing that he is the new Israel. Because if you think about when Israel was founded, Israel had 12 sons. And Israel was to be, right, to be the light of God to the rest of the nations. They failed in that. And so Jesus goes up on a mountain, just like Moses went up on a mountain, and he calls 12 apostles to him. So he's signifying, first of all, okay, I'm the new Israel. I'm going to do, as a human, what Israel failed to do as a nation. And then we see that another number here in Luke chapter 10, and I'm going to read from that. So the Lord now chose 72 other disciples and sent them ahead in pairs to all the towns and places he planned to visit. These were his instructions to them. The harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest and ask him to send more workers into his fields. Now go and remember that I am sending you out as lambs among wolves. Don't take any money with you, nor a traveler's bag, nor an extra pair of sandals. And don't stop to greet anyone on the road. Then he said to the disciples, anyone who accepts your message is also accepting me, and anyone who rejects you is rejecting me. And anyone who rejects me is rejecting God who sent me. Now here Jesus, he starts with 12, but then he sends out 70. And this is the really cool thing that Heiser points out, that what Jesus is doing with sending out the 70 is that he's reclaiming the nations lost in Babel. that he's announcing to the spiritual powers that your days are numbered in your corruption and rule of the nations. It's really a phenomenal picture when you see it. Moving on, verse 17. When the 72 disciples returned, they joyfully reported to him, Lord, even the demons obey us when we use your name. Yes, he told them, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Look, I have given you authority over all the power of the enemy, and you can walk among snakes and scorpions and crush them. Nothing will injure you. But don't rejoice because evil spirits obey you. Rejoice because your names are registered in heaven. And we see here that Jesus is just like God is always wanting to do, that he's come in the flesh and he is sharing his authority with his followers. With his followers. And I want to tell you that at Babel, humanity was scattered and taken over by evil powers. But in Jesus, the nations are being taken back. In Jesus, the nations are being taken back. And this mission continues to this day. This is not something that has ever stopped. And as we wrap up, I want to point out that he finishes with this caution. Not so much a caution, but it's this, and you probably know of churches, you've heard of organizations that kind of become known as like this, with this emphasis on the deliverance and the demonic, and the whole church's world is kind of wrapped around that gifting, right, or those experiences. And I think this aids us when Jesus was saying, yes, it's great that the demons were subject to you. And so great that actually I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. However, the thing to focus on is that you are a part of my kingdom, that you are a part of my people, that your name, rejoice because your names are registered in heaven. Rejoice because your names are registered in heaven. And if this sounds confusing, what does that mean? Basically, it is people who have made Jesus king of their heart and life. This is how you get your name registered in the kingdom of heaven. Paul says it clearly. He says that when you bow your knee, when you begin to worship Jesus as Lord, when you invite him into your life to become Lord of your life, that you are immediately transferred, in the same language, right? These kingdom light, you are transferred from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of the dear Son of God, into Jesus' kingdom. And so this is the language here that Jesus is talking to and that Paul kind of fleshes out. That people who make Jesus king of their heart and life now are a part of the kingdom of Jesus. And once we become part of the kingdom of Jesus, we have the opportunity to help bring Jesus' rule. And as I said last week, if you don't know peace in your heart, you can't bring peace on earth, right? If you're operating in anger or rage or fear in your heart, how can you do anything but become part of the problem in the world? And so Jesus invites us into a relationship with him, invites us to become like him, to begin to walk in peace, to begin to walk in humility, to begin to walk in trust, and to begin to let go of our fear, of our anxiety, of our insecurity. And when we begin to work that out in our own heart, that's when and you know this, if you've been on this journey, that's when you know you start becoming a person that brings that wherever you go. I remember thinking, and it hasn't been that many years ago, where I'm like, you know what? I think I've moved over the 50-50 line. You're thinking, I think actually more than half the time now, I think I'm actually helping Jesus instead of hindering him. Right? Because it is a journey, right? Any of you have been on that journey, you know that. It's 2 steps forward and it's 1 step back. Maybe sometimes 3 or 4 or 5. Sometimes you wind up, off a cliff in a ditch. But this is the beauty, right, of the journey, of the process. That once we surrender to Jesus, we are transferred immediately to his kingdom, to his rule. Worship team, would you guys come? And I want to encourage you. And this is kind of the exciting thing, and as we move into this in the next couple of weeks, that Jesus wants our active participation, right? Even in our imperfection. He wants our active participation, and that we're not just here to survive this world. And it can be a tough place sometimes. Sometimes you just want to crawl in a hole. But we're not here just to survive this world. We're called to push back the darkness and to join Jesus in reclaiming it. To join Jesus in reclaiming it. Stand with me if you would, and let me pray over us.